You wake up every morning telling yourself that being kind, available, and understanding makes you a good person. And maybe you even feel proud of how patient you are, how you never cause problems, how everyone can count on you. But deep down, in those quiet moments before sleep, you feel something gnawing at you, the weight of being overlooked, the sting of jokes made at your expense, the exhaustion of always giving more than you receive. You are tired of being the safe choice, the backup plan, the one people respect just enough to use but never enough to truly value. You smile when they interrupt you mid-sentence. You laugh when they make comments that cut deeper than they should. You say yes when every fiber of your being wants to scream no. And you call this kindness, but your soul knows it is something else entirely. I am Solomon, the king who possessed wisdom and wealth beyond measure, and I am here to tell you that your greatest enemy is not the world around you. It is the version of yourself that believes being harmless is the same as being honorable. Today, you will discover the 7 humiliating mistakes that are quietly destroying your dignity, and more importantly, how to transform from someone who begs for respect into someone who commands it without saying a word. This is not about becoming cruel or cold. This is about becoming the person who walks into a room and shifts the entire energy, who speaks once and is heard above all the noise. The man you are becoming does not explain himself to those who have already chosen not to understand. He does not chase after approval like a hungry dog. He does not mistake being loved for being respected, because he knows that without respect, even love becomes pity. If you are ready to stop being the supporting character in your own life story, if you are ready to build the kind of presence that makes people think twice before they test you, then what you are about to learn will change everything. Subscribe now, because this knowledge will not wait for you to be ready. It demands that you rise to meet it. Number 1. Being loved above being respected. You lie awake at 3 in the morning, replaying that moment when they dismissed your idea without even listening. You think about how you smiled and nodded when they made that joke at your expense in front of everyone. You remember swallowing your words when they interrupted you for the 3rd time in one conversation. And in that darkness, you tell yourself you were being the bigger person. You were being kind. You were being mature. But your chest tightens because you know the truth. You were being afraid. There is a poison that runs deeper than hatred, more dangerous than open conflict, more destructive than declared war. It is the poison of being loved without being respected. You have spent years perfecting the art of being likable, thinking that if people enjoyed your company, they would value your voice. You have confused affection with authority, warmth with worth, popularity with power. And now you sit in rooms where people smile at you and ignore you in the same breath. I am Solomon, and I learned this lesson when the weight of a kingdom rested on my shoulders. When God granted me wisdom beyond measure, I discovered that the man who seeks only to be loved becomes a servant to every whim, every mood, every fleeting opinion of those around him. Love without respect is not love at all. It is pity dressed in pleasant words. Think of the lion and the house cat. Both can be loved, but only one commands the room when it enters. The house cat is petted, fed, and coddled, but it is also ignored, pushed aside, and forgotten when more important matters arise. The lion, however, shifts the very air when it appears. Every creature takes notice. Every movement becomes deliberate. Every sound falls to a whisper. This is not cruelty. This is nature teaching us that respect creates space that love alone cannot claim. You have been the house cat for too long, comfortable, fed, but ultimately powerless. You have trained others to treat you as optional by making yourself available for their convenience and absent for their accountability. You have taught them that your boundaries are suggestions, your time is their right, and your dignity is negotiable. Every time you smiled through disrespect, you wrote them a permission slip to do it again. There was a merchant in my kingdom who sold the finest silk in all the land, but he was desperate to be liked by every customer who entered his shop. He would lower his prices at the first sign of hesitation. He would throw in extra goods to make people smile. He would apologize for asking fair payment for exceptional work. Within 2 years, people expected his generosity. Within 3 years, they demanded it. Within 4 years, he was giving away his livelihood and calling it customer service. He died beloved by everyone and owned by no one. Another merchant sold goods of equal quality but with different wisdom. He set his prices and held them. He was courteous but not desperate. He would listen to complaints but not absorb them as personal failures. When customers tried to negotiate, he would smile and say, "The price reflects the value. If the value doesn't speak to you, perhaps this isn't the right match." People respected his confidence. They paid his prices. They recommended his shop. They knew that buying from him was a privilege, not a right. The difference between these two men was not kindness. Both were decent human beings. The difference was that one believed love would protect him, while the other understood that respect would sustain him. The first man spent his life managing other people's emotions. The second man spent his life managing his own standards. Here is the shift that will change everything. Stop asking yourself whether people like what you do. Start asking whether they respect why you do it. Stop worrying about hurt feelings when you enforce a boundary. Start worrying about the hurt you cause yourself when you don't. Stop believing that saying no makes you mean. Start understanding that never saying no makes you meaningless. The man who is only loved can be replaced by anyone willing to smile wider, agree faster, or give more freely. But the man who is respected has built something that cannot be duplicated by mere pleasantness. He has built a reputation for being someone whose word means something, whose time has value, whose presence makes a difference. This does not mean becoming cold or cruel. It means becoming consistent. When you say something, you mean it. When you set a boundary, you guard it. When someone crosses the line, there are consequences, not conversations about how disappointed you are. Love says, "I hope you understand." Respect says, "It doesn't matter if you understand." You must make the choice that every king, every leader, every person of influence has had to make. Will you be the ruler who is loved by his subjects but overthrown by his enemies? Or will you be the ruler who is respected by both and therefore secure in his position? The popular king gives gold to everyone until the treasury is empty. The respected king gives gold to those who deserve it and keeps enough to fund the kingdom's future. When someone interrupts you now, you stop speaking and wait. When they finish, you continue from where you left off without acknowledging the interruption. You have just taught them that your words have weight that cannot be brushed aside. When someone makes a joke at your expense, you look at them directly and say, "Explain to me why that's funny." Watch how quickly the room changes when you refuse to laugh at your own expense. When someone expects you to drop everything for their convenience, you say, "I understand this is important to you. I'm available on Tuesday at 3 or Friday at 10. Which works better?" You have just transformed yourself from their emergency contact into their appointment. You have moved from being their right to being their privilege. The people who truly love you will not be threatened by your newfound respect for yourself. They will celebrate it. They will feel safer around someone who protects their own dignity because they know you will protect theirs as well. The people who are threatened by your boundaries were never loving you. They were using you. It is better to be respected by few than loved by many who see you as convenient rather than valuable. It is better to have 5 people who think carefully before they speak to you than 50 who interrupt you without consequence. It is better to be missed when you are absent than taken for granted when you are present. Respect is not about making people fear you. It is about making them consider you. It is about creating a presence so solid that moving around you requires intention, not accident. It is about building a reputation so consistent that people know what to expect and understand what will not be tolerated. The wise king learns that love without respect is powerless, but respect without love is sustainable. And when you have learned to command respect, you may find that the love that follows is deeper, more genuine, and infinitely more valuable than the shallow affection you settled for before. Number 2, excessive availability. Your phone buzzes at 11:30 at night, and without thinking, you reach for it. Someone needs an immediate response to something that could have waited until morning, and you provide it. You tell yourself you are being helpful, responsible, caring. But in the darkness of your room, as you finally set the phone down an hour later, you feel something you cannot name. It is the exhaustion of having no sanctuary, no moment that belongs solely to you, no space that others cannot invade at will. You have made yourself so available that your presence has become wallpaper. People notice it only when it is missing. Your accessibility, which you believed would make you valuable, has instead made you common. You have become the background music of other people's lives, always playing, rarely heard, easily replaced with something else when the mood changes. I am Solomon, and I knew the burden of being needed by an entire kingdom. But even as king, I learned that the man who is always available becomes less valuable than the man who is selectively present. What is abundant loses its preciousness. What is rare commands attention, respect, and careful consideration. Consider the desert spring and the city fountain. Both provide water, both sustain life, both serve essential purposes. But the wanderer who discovers the spring in the vast emptiness will kneel with gratitude, drink carefully, and remember its location for the rest of his life. The same wanderer passes the city fountain 100 times without pausing, takes its presence for granted, and complains when the water pressure is low. The difference is not the quality of the water. The difference is the effort required to access it. You have become the city fountain, always flowing, always accessible, always taken for granted. People approach you with their thirsts great and small, expecting you to provide whatever they need whenever they need it. They do not consider whether you have been running dry. They do not ask whether you have reserves. They do not wonder whether you need time to replenish what you have given. They simply expect the flow to continue. Your accessibility has created an unconscious arrogance in others. They believe your time belongs to them. They believe your energy is renewable without rest. They believe your attention is their right rather than your gift. And why shouldn't they believe this? You have taught them through every immediate response, every dropped plan to accommodate their urgency, every prioritization of their convenience over your peace. There was a counselor in my court who prided himself on being available to anyone who needed guidance. His door was always open. His schedule was always flexible. His wisdom was always freely given. He believed this made him valuable to the kingdom. For a time, it seemed to work. People sought his advice constantly. His reputation for availability spread throughout the land. But something strange began to happen. Because his time cost nothing, people began to value it as nothing. They would arrive without appointments, leave without gratitude, and return with problems they had not bothered to think through because they knew he would do the thinking for them. His wisdom became a convenience rather than a treasure. Young nobles would interrupt his conversations without apology. Servants would demand his immediate attention for trivial matters. His accessibility had created an expectation that his wisdom was ordinary rather than extraordinary. Meanwhile, there was another counselor who was known to be wise but difficult to reach. He accepted only 3 appointments per day. He required that people come to him with specific questions and evidence that they had already attempted to solve their problems. He charged a fee not because he needed the money, but because he understood that people value what costs them something. His counsel was sought by kings from other lands. His words were remembered, written down, and acted upon. His wisdom was treasured because it was not treated as common. The difference between these men was not their knowledge or their heart for helping others. The difference was that one had learned the power of strategic scarcity, while the other had fallen into the trap of destructive abundance. Your presence must become a prize, not a given. Your attention must be earned, not assumed. Your time must be respected, not consumed. This is not about becoming arrogant or uncaring. This is about understanding that when something has no barriers, it develops no value in the minds of those who receive it. Think about the layers of access to your life. There is physical access, the ability to reach your body and occupy your space. There is psychological access, the ability to capture your thoughts and influence your mental state. There is emotional access, the ability to affect your feelings and change your mood. And there is spiritual access, the ability to touch the deepest parts of who you are and why you exist. Most people have thrown open all these doors simultaneously to anyone who knocks. They answer every call, respond to every message, attend every gathering, and make themselves physically present whenever requested. They allow every opinion to rent space in their minds, every criticism to set up camp in their thoughts, and every demand to reorganize their priorities. They let every person's emotions become their responsibility, and every person's crisis become their emergency. They permit others to question their decisions, challenge their beliefs, and require justification for their choices. This is not kindness. This is the abdication of self-governance. This is allowing your life to be run by committee, with every committee member believing they have equal voting rights in decisions that should be yours alone. The transformation begins when you understand that access to you must be earned in stages. Physical access requires invitation. Not everyone gets to know where you are at all times. Not everyone gets to drop by unannounced. Not everyone gets immediate responses to their messages. Your physical presence becomes something people anticipate rather than assume. Psychological access requires demonstrated respect. Not everyone gets to know what you are thinking about. Not everyone gets to influence your decisions. Not everyone gets to fill your mind with their concerns, their fears, their urgent requests for solutions to problems they created. Your mental energy becomes a limited resource that you distribute intentionally. Emotional access requires proven trustworthiness. Not everyone gets to affect your mood. Not everyone gets to make their feelings your responsibility. Not everyone gets to turn their bad day into your problem or their anxiety into your action item. Your emotional state becomes your domain, influenced by those who have earned the right to matter. Spiritual access is reserved for the rare few who understand the sacred nature of who you are. These are the people who do not try to change your core beliefs, who do not demand that you compromise your values for their comfort, who do not require you to be smaller so they can feel larger. These are the people who see your full self and want you to remain fully yourself. When you begin to implement these layers, something remarkable happens. People start to think before they approach you. They consider whether their request is truly important before making it. They prepare what they want to say before they say it. They show gratitude for access instead of entitlement to availability. They begin to respect your time because they understand it is not unlimited. This does not make you less caring. It makes your caring more valuable. This does not make you less helpful. It makes your help more meaningful. This does not make you less loving. It makes your love more precious because it is not scattered like seed on every path that presents itself. Start with small boundaries. Don't answer messages immediately unless they are true emergencies. Let people know that you check messages at specific times rather than constantly throughout the day. Stop saying yes to every invitation and start asking yourself whether you actually want to attend before responding. Begin to schedule your availability rather than simply being available whenever others feel the need to access you. The people who truly value you will adapt to these boundaries without complaint. They will respect your time more because they see that you respect it. They will treasure their interactions with you more because they understand those interactions are not guaranteed. The people who resist your boundaries were never respecting your accessibility. They were exploiting it. Scarcity creates value. Intention creates meaning. Boundaries create respect. When you stop being everywhere all the time, you start being somewhere with purpose. When you stop answering everything immediately, your words start carrying weight. When you stop being constantly available, your presence starts being constantly appreciated. The king who holds court every moment of every day soon finds his throne room empty because no one values what they can have anytime. But the king who holds court at appointed times finds that his wisdom is sought, his presence is honored, and his words are remembered long after they are spoken. Number 3, over-explaining. You hang up the phone and immediately feel that familiar knot in your stomach. You spent 20 minutes explaining why you couldn't attend their event, providing a detailed account of your schedule, justifying your priorities, and apologizing for disappointing them. By the end of the conversation, you felt like a defendant pleading your case to a judge who had already decided you were guilty. They said they understood, but you could hear the judgment in their voice, the subtle implication that if you really cared, you would find a way. You do this every time. Someone questions your decision, and you immediately launch into an elaborate explanation as if your choice requires their approval to be valid. Someone expresses disappointment in your boundary, and you begin justifying why the boundary exists, providing evidence for why it's necessary, building a case for why you're not the terrible person they're implying you are. You have become a lawyer arguing for the legitimacy of your own life. I am Solomon, and I learned from God himself the power of words that carry weight without needing justification. When the Lord speaks, he does not follow his commands with lengthy explanations of why they are reasonable. When he sets boundaries, he does not provide dissertations on their necessity. His words stand alone, powerful in their simplicity, unshakable in their certainty. The wise learn to speak with similar authority over their own lives. Excessive explanation is the language of insecurity. It reveals that you do not trust your own judgment enough to let it stand without defense. It communicates to others that your decisions are tentative, subject to revision if they can provide a compelling counter-argument. It transforms you from someone who makes choices into someone who negotiates the right to make choices. Every word you add beyond what is necessary dilutes the power of what you actually need to say. It's like adding water to wine, making the drink weaker with each drop, until what was once strong enough to transform becomes too weak to notice. Your explanation begins with clarity and dissolves into doubt, begins with strength and ends with pleading, begins with decision and concludes with apology. Consider the master sculptor and the apprentice, both working on blocks of marble. The apprentice believes that more work makes better art. He chips and carves and explains every mark to anyone who will listen. Why did you remove that piece? He launches into a detailed analysis of proportions and artistic vision. Why did you choose that angle? He provides a lengthy justification of classical techniques and modern innovations. His sculpture becomes cluttered with unnecessary details, each one added because he felt compelled to prove his choices were correct. The master sculptor works differently. Each strike of the chisel is deliberate. Each piece removed reveals more of what was always meant to be. When someone asks why he made a particular choice, he simply says, because that's what the stone required. His explanation is complete because his confidence is complete. He does not need to justify his vision to those who cannot see it themselves. The apprentice's sculpture pleases no one because it was created to answer everyone's questions rather than express one clear vision. The master's sculpture endures because it was created from certainty, shaped by purpose, and presented without apology for what it is. You have been the apprentice, carving your life according to everyone else's commentary, explaining every choice until the choices themselves disappear beneath the explanations. You have forgotten that some things are true whether others understand them or not, valid whether others approve or not, necessary whether others agree or not. There was a time when a neighboring king questioned my decision to build the temple in a particular location. His messengers came with detailed arguments about why another site would be better for trade, easier for construction, more impressive to visiting dignitaries. They expected me to respond with equally detailed counter-arguments, to prove that my choice was superior by dismantling theirs point by point. Instead, I sent back a single message: "This is where the temple will be built." There was no explanation, no justification, no attempt to convince them my reasoning was sound. The temple was built where I decided it would be built, and it became a wonder that drew people from across the known world. My certainty created reality. Their questions became irrelevant. Had I engaged in lengthy explanations, I would have opened the door to lengthy debates. Had I justified my choice, I would have implied their approval was necessary for my decision to be valid. Had I provided detailed reasoning, I would have given them detailed ammunition to argue against each point. Instead, I spoke with the authority of someone who had already decided, and decision spoken with confidence tends to end discussion rather than extend it. When you over-explain, you hand people a map of your insecurities. Every reason you provide becomes a potential weakness they can exploit. Every justification you offer becomes evidence that you're not certain of your own judgment. Every additional sentence becomes proof that you need their understanding more than you trust your own wisdom. The shift happens when you realize that understanding is not required for respect. People do not need to comprehend your reasons to accept your decisions. They do not need to agree with your choices to honor your right to make them. They do not need detailed explanations to recognize that you have spoken with finality. When someone asks why you can't do something, try responding with a simple, "I'm not available that day." When they push for more details, resist the urge to provide them. Say, "I have other commitments." When they continue to probe, understand that they are not seeking information. They are testing whether your no is actually a yes disguised as a no, whether your boundary is actually a negotiation disguised as a boundary. The person who respects your initial answer will accept it without demanding justification. The person who keeps pushing after you've given your answer is revealing that they believe your boundaries are optional if they can find the right argument to overcome them. These are the people who have trained you to over-explain by rewarding your explanations with continued pressure. Your words should land with the weight of finality, not float with the lightness of suggestions. When you say no, it should sound like no, not like the opening offer in a negotiation. When you make a decision, it should feel like a decision, not like a proposal waiting for approval from committee members who weren't invited to the meeting where the choice was made. This doesn't mean being rude or dismissive. It means being clear and complete. "Thank you for thinking of me, but I won't be able to join you" is a complete sentence. It requires no additional explanation, no detailed scheduling conflicts, no apologies for having a life that sometimes conflicts with other people's preferences. The people who care about you will respect your brevity because they trust your judgment. The people who demand explanations are revealing that they don't trust your judgment and believe their understanding should be required for your choices to be valid. These people have confused their curiosity with their authority, their questions with their rights. When you stop over-explaining, your words regain their power. When you stop justifying your decisions, people stop questioning them. When you stop apologizing for having boundaries, people stop trying to cross them. Your silence becomes more powerful than your speeches, because silence carries the weight of certainty, while explanations carry the burden of doubt. The king who explains every decree invites debate about every decree. The king who speaks with authority creates acceptance of his authority. Your life is your kingdom, your choices are your decrees, and your boundaries are your laws. Speak them with the confidence of someone who has the right to rule their own domain. Number 4, tolerating subtle disrespect. You are in the middle of sharing an idea when someone cuts you off to make their own point. You pause, smile politely, and wait for them to finish before trying to continue. But the moment has passed. The energy has shifted. Your thought feels less important now, somehow diminished by the interruption you allowed to stand unchallenged. You tell yourself it's not worth making a scene over, that bringing it up would make you look petty, that the mature thing is to let it slide. But it doesn't slide. It accumulates. The interruptions become more frequent. The dismissive looks become more obvious. The subtle jokes at your expense become bolder. The pattern of small disrespects grows into a foundation of assumption that your dignity is negotiable, your boundaries are optional, and your presence is background noise rather than valued contribution. I am Solomon, and I learned that kingdoms are not lost to dramatic battles alone. They are also lost to small concessions that seem reasonable in the moment but create dangerous precedents over time. The enemy who tests your borders with a single soldier is not seeking that small piece of land. He is discovering whether you will defend what is yours or teach him that your territory can be taken 1 inch at a time. Subtle disrespect is the reconnaissance mission that precedes open contempt. When someone interrupts you and you say nothing, they learn that your voice can be silenced without consequence. When someone makes a joke at your expense and you laugh along, they learn that your dignity is a toy they can play with for their entertainment. When someone dismisses your ideas with a wave of their hand and you accept the dismissal, they learn that your thoughts have no weight that must be respected. Each small disrespect you tolerate becomes a lesson you teach about how you can be treated. Each boundary you allow to be crossed becomes proof that your boundaries are suggestions rather than rules. Each moment of subtle contempt you absorb becomes evidence that contempt is an acceptable way to interact with you. Think of respect as a line drawn in sand. When someone steps across that line and you say nothing, the line doesn't just get crossed, it gets erased. The next person doesn't even see that a boundary once existed there. They step into the same space more boldly, because there's no evidence that the space was ever protected. Soon, what was once clearly your territory becomes common ground where anyone can tread without consideration. The tragedy is not just that you lose respect. The tragedy is that you train others to disrespect you, then resent them for behaving the way you taught them to behave. You become angry at their boldness while ignoring that their boldness grew from your permissiveness. You feel victimized by their assumption that they can treat you poorly, while overlooking the fact that you have provided overwhelming evidence that poor treatment will be tolerated. There was a merchant in my kingdom who owned a beautiful shop in the marketplace. He took pride in the quality of his goods and the fairness of his prices. But he was a gentle man who avoided confrontation at almost any cost. When customers would pick up his merchandise roughly, he said nothing. When they would negotiate aggressively, demanding lower prices with threats to take their business elsewhere, he would often relent. When they would make disparaging comments about his goods in front of other customers, he would smile and try to win them over with even better offers. Word spread through the marketplace that this merchant could be pushed. What began as small tests of his boundaries became brazen displays of disrespect. Customers would enter his shop and immediately begin complaining, knowing that complaints would be rewarded with discounts. They would handle his finest goods carelessly, knowing that protests would not come. They would bring friends to witness how easily they could manipulate him, turning his shop into theater where his dignity was the entertainment. Within months, his shop became known not for the quality of its goods, but for the weakness of its owner. The customers who respected quality went elsewhere, not wanting to be associated with a place where the owner was openly mocked. The customers who remained were those who enjoyed the sport of seeing how much they could get away with. His gentle nature, which should have been a strength, became a weakness because it was gentleness without backbone, kindness without boundaries, patience without limits. Meanwhile, another merchant ran his shop with different wisdom. His goods were of similar quality, his prices equally fair. But when customers became disrespectful, he would stop what he was doing and address the behavior directly. Not with shouting or anger, but with clear, calm words that established what would and would not be tolerated. I expect customers in my shop to treat both the merchandise and the owner with respect. If that's not possible for you, perhaps you'd be more comfortable shopping elsewhere. The transformation was immediate. The customer would either apologize and adjust their behavior or leave the shop. Either outcome was acceptable because both resulted in a shopping environment where respect was the standard rather than the exception. Word spread about this merchant too, but the word was different. People knew that shopping in his establishment meant conducting themselves properly. The customers who came were those who valued quality and understood that quality environments require quality behavior. Both merchants were kind, but only one understood that kindness without boundaries becomes an invitation for exploitation. Both wanted to serve their customers well, but only one realized that serving people well sometimes requires refusing to serve them at all. The shift in your own life begins the moment you understand that allowing disrespect doesn't make you noble, it makes you an enabler of poor behavior. When someone interrupts you now, you stop speaking and wait. You don't continue your thought as if the interruption didn't happen. You make the interruption visible by your response to it. When they finish speaking, you say calmly, "I wasn't finished with my thought." You then continue from exactly where you left off. This simple action sends a clear message. Your words have weight that cannot be brushed aside. The person learns that interrupting you has a consequence, which is the uncomfortable pause and the clear indication that their behavior was noticed and will not be ignored. Most people will apologize and be more careful in future conversations. The few who don't apologize have revealed something important about their character and their level of respect for you. When someone makes a joke at your expense, don't laugh along to show you're a good sport. Look at them directly and say, "Explain to me why that's funny." This question transforms their attempt at humor into an examination of their intent. They must either explain why your embarrassment entertains them, which makes them look cruel, or admit that the joke wasn't actually funny, which makes them look foolish. Either way, they learn that making you the target of their humor has an uncomfortable consequence. When someone dismisses your idea without proper consideration, don't simply accept the dismissal and move on. Say, "I'd like to understand your concerns with the approach I suggested." This forces them to engage with your idea rather than dismiss it, to provide actual reasoning rather than casual rejection. It shows that your thoughts require respectful consideration, not careless discarding. The key is responding in the moment, not storing up resentments to discuss later. Delayed responses to disrespect teach people that disrespect is acceptable as long as they don't have to face immediate consequences. Immediate responses teach people that disrespect costs more than it's worth, that treating you poorly requires more energy than treating you well. You don't need to raise your voice or create drama. You simply need to make it clear that certain behaviors have certain outcomes. Disrespect gets addressed, boundaries get enforced, poor treatment gets consequences. This isn't about being difficult or confrontational. This is about being clear about the standards required for access to you. The people who respect you will appreciate your clarity because they never intended to cross your boundaries in the first place. The people who resist your new standards were depending on your old permissiveness to get away with behavior they knew was inappropriate. They will either adjust their approach or remove themselves from your life. Both outcomes serve your well-being. When you stop tolerating subtle disrespect, you stop training people to treat you disrespectfully. When you address small violations immediately, you prevent them from growing into large ones. When you protect your dignity in small moments, you don't have to fight for it in big ones. Respect is not something you earn once and keep forever. It is something you maintain through consistent responses to how you are treated. The moment you stop protecting it, you begin losing it. The moment you begin protecting it again, you begin rebuilding it. Number 5, arguing with logic against those already against you. You find yourself in a conversation that feels like a courtroom where you were declared guilty before the trial began. The other person has already made up their mind about your motives, your character, your worth. But you keep talking, keep explaining, keep providing evidence as if the right combination of words will suddenly make them see reason. You marshal facts, present logical arguments, appeal to their sense of fairness, all while they listen with the expression of someone waiting for you to finish so they can explain why you're still wrong. Hours later, you walk away exhausted and frustrated, no closer to understanding or resolution than when the conversation began. You feel like you were speaking different languages, playing by different rules, competing in a game where the outcome was predetermined. You told yourself you were seeking truth, but what you were really doing was begging for approval from someone who had already decided you didn't deserve it. I am Solomon, and I learned that there are battles worth fighting and battles that drain your strength without possibility of victory. When someone has positioned themselves as your opponent rather than your partner in understanding, when they have chosen sides rather than seeking solutions, when they listen to respond rather than to comprehend, you are no longer in a discussion. You are in a performance where your role is to provide ammunition for their predetermined conclusion. The man who argues with logic against those already committed to his failure makes the same mistake as the man who tries to convince the storm to be gentle. The storm is not interested in negotiation. It has its own nature, its own power, its own agenda. Your words cannot change what it is, only what you choose to do in response to what it is. When someone has decided you are wrong, your attempts to prove you are right become evidence of exactly what they expected to find. If you remain calm, you are cold and calculating. If you show emotion, you are unstable and defensive. If you provide facts, you are arrogant and condescending. If you acknowledge their concerns, you are manipulative and fake. The game is rigged because the judge has already written the verdict. This is the trap that destroys good people who believe that reason will always prevail over prejudice, that truth will always overcome bias, that sincere explanation will always dissolve unfair judgment. They enter every hostile conversation with the faith that somewhere in their arsenal of logic is the perfect argument that will change their opponent's mind. They exhaust themselves firing intellectual ammunition at targets that have already decided not to be hit. There was a minister in my court who was falsely accused of stealing from the royal treasury. The accusation came from an enemy who had been plotting against him for months, gathering allies, building a case based on coincidence and speculation rather than evidence. When the minister learned of the charges, his first instinct was to defend himself through detailed explanation. He requested a hearing before the full court. He brought records, witnesses, and documentation that clearly proved his innocence. He spent hours methodically dismantling every piece of the accusation, showing how each claim was either false or taken out of context. His presentation was thorough, logical, and compelling. By any reasonable standard, he had proven his case beyond doubt. But the hearing was never about truth. It was about power. His enemy had already convinced key members of the court that the minister was guilty. They came to the hearing not to weigh evidence, but to watch the minister struggle. Every point he made was met with skeptical questions that required even more explanation. Every piece of evidence he presented was dismissed as potentially fabricated. Every witness who spoke in his favor was suspected of being part of the conspiracy. The more the minister explained, the more desperate he appeared. His logical arguments began to sound like elaborate cover-ups. His detailed evidence began to look like the kind of preparation only a guilty man would need. His calm presentation began to seem like the performance of someone with much to hide. The very thoroughness of his defense became evidence of his guilt in the minds of those who had already decided he was guilty. Meanwhile, his accuser said very little. He simply repeated the basic claims, expressed disappointment in someone he had trusted, and let the minister's own words create the impression of guilt. The more the minister talked, the more guilty he sounded to ears that were listening for guilt rather than truth. The minister made the mistake of believing he was in a court of law when he was actually in a court of public opinion, where perception matters more than proof, and the loudest truth can be drowned out by the quietest lie told to ready ears. I watched this unfold and learned that when someone has committed to your destruction, your words become weapons in their hands rather than tools of your defense. Everything you say can and will be used against you in the court of their predetermined opinion. Your silence cannot be twisted into additional evidence of guilt, but your speech certainly can. The wise response to a hostile audience is not more explanation but strategic withdrawal. When you realize you are not in a conversation but in an ambush, when you understand you are not being heard but being hunted, when you recognize you are not seeking mutual understanding but feeding someone else's need to be right at your expense, the correct response is to stop participating in your own destruction. This doesn't mean you never defend yourself. It means you choose your battles based on whether victory is possible and worthwhile. It means you recognize the difference between someone who disagrees with you and someone who has decided to be your enemy. It means you understand that some fights are designed to exhaust you rather than resolve anything. When someone approaches you with their mind already made up, with their questions designed to trap rather than clarify, with their listening focused on finding flaws rather than understanding truth, your best response is often the briefest response. I understand you see it differently. I understand we disagree. I understand your position. These responses acknowledge what they've said without accepting their framing of who you are or what your motives were. The person who is genuinely seeking understanding will accept these responses and either drop the subject or approach it differently. The person who is seeking to dominate you will be frustrated by your refusal to provide more material for their attack. That frustration reveals their true intent, which was never understanding but conquest. You cannot logic someone out of a position they did not logic themselves into. You cannot reason with someone who is committed to unreasonableness. You cannot prove your worth to someone who is invested in your worthlessness. Your energy is better spent with people who judge you fairly than trying to convince people who judge you unfairly that their judgment is wrong. When you stop trying to win arguments with people who have already decided you should lose, you reclaim the power they were using against you. When you stop explaining yourself to people who have decided your explanations are lies, you stop giving them ammunition for their predetermined conclusions. When you stop seeking approval from people who have decided you don't deserve it, you stop participating in your own devaluation. The battles worth fighting are fought with people who might actually change their minds based on new information. The battles that drain your soul are fought with people who ask for your information so they can find better ways to dismiss it. Learn to recognize the difference and save your energy for contests where victory leads somewhere worthwhile rather than nowhere at all. Number 6, trying to restore image with more kindness. Your reputation has been damaged. Maybe someone spread false information about you. Maybe a situation was misunderstood. Maybe your boundaries were interpreted as selfishness, your standards as arrogance, your strength as cruelty. The whispers have started, the invitations have stopped, and you can feel the shift in how people look at you. Your instinct is to fix this by being even kinder, even more generous, even more accommodating than before. You believe that if you can just show them how good your heart really is, they will forget whatever made them question you in the first place. So you begin the campaign of compensatory kindness. You smile wider, give more freely, agree more readily. You volunteer for things you don't want to do, attend events you have no interest in, say yes to requests that drain your energy, all in service of rehabilitation. You hope that by doubling down on niceness, you can erase whatever damage has been done to your reputation. But something unexpected happens. The more desperately kind you become, the more people seem to believe that the original criticism was justified. I am Solomon, and I learned that trying to restore your image through excessive kindness is like trying to stop bleeding by cutting yourself more deeply. The wound that hurt your reputation was not a lack of kindness. The wound was that your boundaries, your standards, or your strength made someone uncomfortable, and they chose to interpret that discomfort as evidence of your moral failure. Responding to that interpretation with desperate kindness validates their claim that something was wrong with your original behavior. When you try to heal your reputation by becoming more accommodating, you send an unspoken message that accommodation was indeed what was missing. When you try to prove you're not selfish by giving more than is wise, you imply that selfishness might have been the real problem. When you try to demonstrate humility through self-diminishment, you suggest that arrogance was actually present in your previous behavior. The very act of compensating communicates guilt. People begin to think that if you weren't guilty of whatever they heard, you wouldn't be working so hard to prove your innocence. Your increased kindness becomes evidence that their suspicions were warranted. Your extra generosity becomes proof that greed was indeed an issue. Your new accommodating nature becomes confirmation that you were indeed as difficult as they were told. Think of reputation as a building and criticism as weather. When a storm damages your building, you don't fix it by removing more walls to show how open and welcoming your structure can be. You repair the actual damage and reinforce what was weakened. But you don't change the fundamental architecture just because someone complained about the color of your roof. When your reputation faces a storm, the solution is not to tear down everything that made you strong in the first place. It's to weather the storm while maintaining the integrity of who you are. The people who matter will see that the building remains solid despite the weather. The people who don't matter were probably looking for reasons to criticize your architecture anyway. There was a judge in my kingdom known for fair but firm decisions. He would listen carefully to every case, weigh evidence thoughtfully, and render judgments that were just but not always popular. When he ruled against powerful people, they accepted his decisions because they respected his consistency and integrity. His reputation was built on reliability rather than agreeability, fairness rather than favoritism. One day, he had to rule against a wealthy merchant who had many friends throughout the city. The merchant was clearly in the wrong. The evidence was overwhelming, but his social connections ran deep. When the judge ruled according to law and evidence, the merchant began a campaign to damage his reputation. He spread stories that the judge was harsh, unforgiving, impossible to reason with. He claimed the judge had personal vendettas against successful businessmen. He suggested that the judge enjoyed using his power to hurt people. The whispers spread through the social circles where the merchant had influence. People who had never appeared before the judge began to question his character. Invitations to social gatherings stopped coming. Former friends became distant. The judge felt the shift in how he was perceived, and it troubled him deeply. His first instinct was to prove the accusations wrong by demonstrating extraordinary kindness. He began ruling more leniently in cases that followed. He started explaining his decisions with excessive detail to show his thoughtfulness. He attended social events he had previously avoided to demonstrate his personable nature. He donated more generously to public causes to show his civic heart. But something unfortunate began to happen. His new leniency made people question his previous firmness. If he could be understanding now, why hadn't he been understanding before? His detailed explanations made his decisions seem uncertain rather than thoughtful. His sudden social presence felt forced rather than genuine. His increased generosity looked like guilt money rather than civic duty. Worse, the criminals who had learned to respect his consistent firmness began to test his new flexibility. Crime increased as word spread that the once reliable judge had become unpredictable. Justice became inconsistent as he tried to balance his legal obligations with his desire to appear more likable. Meanwhile, I had been watching this situation unfold. I called the judge to my private chambers and told him something he would never forget. A man who changes his character to answer his critics gives those critics power over his character. You were criticized not for being wrong, but for being right in a way that cost someone something they wanted to keep. Your error is not in how you ruled before, but in how you are ruling now. The judge realized that his attempt to restore his reputation was actually destroying the thing that made him worthy of respect in the first place. He returned to his original standards of firm fairness. Some people never forgave him for the cases that had offended them, but the people who mattered recognized that his integrity had been temporarily shaken, but not permanently broken. When your reputation is damaged, the path to restoration is not through becoming someone else. It's through remaining who you are with even more clarity and consistency. The people who attacked your character were not offering constructive feedback. They were trying to manipulate you into becoming easier to control, less challenging to deal with, more accommodating of their preferences. Your response should not be to accommodate their manipulation, but to recognize it for what it is. When someone criticizes your boundaries, the problem is not your boundaries. When someone attacks your standards, the issue is not your standards. When someone questions your strength, the weakness is not in your character. The correct response to reputation damage is strategic patience combined with consistent character. You continue being who you are while time reveals the truth of who you are. You let your actions speak over months and years, rather than trying to shout over critics in days and weeks. You trust that people of good judgment will eventually see past the noise to the reality of your character. This doesn't mean being stubborn or refusing to learn from legitimate criticism. It means distinguishing between criticism that seeks to improve you and criticism that seeks to control you. Criticism that comes with specific suggestions for specific improvements is usually trying to help. Criticism that demands you become fundamentally different is usually trying to dominate. When you stop trying to win back everyone who questions you and start focusing on being worthy of those who truly know you, your reputation stops being a hostage to other people's opinions and starts being a reflection of your actual character. The people who matter will see who you really are. The people who don't matter will find something else to criticize once they realize you're no longer participating in their game. Your reputation is rebuilt through consistency, not compensation. It's restored through character, not kindness campaigns. It's renewed through time and truth, not through desperate attempts to please everyone who has decided to be displeased with you. Number 7, believing kindness will protect you. You have lived your life according to a beautiful lie. You believed that if you were kind to others, others would be kind to you. You thought that if you treated people with respect, respect would naturally flow back to you. You assumed that goodness was a shield that would protect you from the malice, manipulation, and cruelty that you witnessed in the world around you. You were certain that your pure intentions would somehow create a protective barrier around your life, that your genuine care for others would be recognized and reciprocated by everyone you encountered. But life has taught you a harder lesson. You have discovered that some people interpret kindness as weakness. You have learned that certain individuals see your desire to help as an invitation to take advantage. You have found that your refusal to play power games, your reluctance to manipulate, your commitment to treating others well regardless of how they treat you, has sometimes made you a target for those who have no such commitments. I am Solomon, and I received wisdom from the source of all wisdom, Yet even I had to learn that righteousness without strategy is often defeated by evil with a plan. God did not give me only wisdom. He also gave me the knowledge of when to use it, how to protect it, and why boundaries are not barriers to love, but the very foundation that makes love sustainable in a fallen world. Kindness is indeed a virtue, but kindness without discernment is naivety. Goodness is indeed powerful, but goodness without boundaries is vulnerability disguised as virtue. Love is indeed the highest calling, but love without limits becomes enabling, and enabling becomes participation in the very behaviors that love should transform. You have confused being harmless with being good, being passive with being peaceful, being taken advantage of with being generous. These are not the same things. The sheep is harmless, but it feeds the wolf. The doormat is passive, but it dirties under every footstep. The person who can be exploited will be exploited, not because the world is entirely evil, but because some people in the world are entirely willing to take what they can get from those who are entirely unwilling to stop them. The protection you thought kindness would provide was never meant to come from kindness alone. It was meant to come from kindness backed by wisdom, generosity balanced by discernment, love strengthened by boundaries. You were meant to be gentle as a dove but wise as a serpent, not because wisdom makes you less loving, but because wisdom makes your love more effective and sustainable. Consider the difference between a garden and a field of weeds. Both receive the same sunlight, the same rain, the same seasons. But the garden has a gardener who tends it, protects it from invasive plants, waters what should grow, and removes what would destroy the carefully planted seeds. The field of weeds grows whatever takes root, allows whatever wants to spread, and becomes overrun with whatever is most aggressive rather than what is most beautiful or useful. Your life has been the field of weeds because you believed that natural goodness would somehow automatically create good results. You planted kindness and expected to harvest respect without realizing that respect must also be planted, cultivated, and protected. You offered generosity without boundaries and wondered why people began to expect more rather than appreciate what they received. You provided access without limits and questioned why people began to take your availability for granted rather than treasure your presence. The garden requires both sunlight and walls, both open space for growth and barriers against those things that would destroy what is trying to grow. Your kindness is the sunlight, but you forgot to build the walls. Your heart is the fertile soil, but you forgot to guard against the weeds that would choke out everything good you were trying to cultivate. There was a farmer in my kingdom who had the richest soil in all the land. His heart was generous, and he wanted to share the bounty of his harvest with anyone who was hungry. He would plant his fields with the finest seeds, tend them with great care, and when harvest time came, he would invite the community to take what they needed. His intention was beautiful, his motivation pure, his desire to help others genuine. But something unfortunate began to happen. Word spread about the farmer's generosity, and people started coming not just when they were hungry, but whenever they wanted something free. They would take not just what they needed, but as much as they could carry. Some would even sell what they took from his fields in other markets, profiting from his kindness, while contributing nothing to the work that made it possible. The farmer noticed that his harvests were being depleted faster than they could be replenished. He was working harder but having less to show for his efforts. The people who truly needed help were often left with nothing because others who simply wanted free goods had taken everything first. His generosity was being hijacked by people who had no generosity of their own. Still, the farmer resisted putting boundaries around his fields because he believed that would make him selfish. He was afraid that requiring people to ask before taking, or limiting how much each person could take, would somehow corrupt his pure motivation to help. He thought that true kindness meant allowing people to take whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted it, without questions or conditions. Within a few seasons, The farmer's fields were not only being harvested by others, but people were beginning to plant their own crops in his soil without permission, claiming sections of his land as their own because he had never established clear boundaries about what belonged to him. His kindness had been interpreted as weakness, his generosity as ownership transferred to whoever was bold enough to claim it. Eventually, the farmer realized that his unlimited generosity was destroying his ability to be generous. His refusal to protect what he had worked to create was eliminating his capacity to continue creating it. His fields became barren not because he was selfish, but because he had been so unselfish that he had nothing left to be unselfish with. Meanwhile, another farmer in the same region had soil of similar quality and a heart of similar generosity. But this farmer understood something the first one did not. Boundaries are not barriers to generosity. They are the foundation that makes generosity sustainable. He too wanted to share his harvest with those who needed it, but he did so in a way that protected his ability to keep producing harvests to share. He established clear times when people could come to receive from his fields. He set reasonable limits on how much each family could take so that there would be enough for everyone who truly needed it. He required that people ask before taking and explain their need so that he could prioritize those with the greatest necessity. He made it clear that his fields were his to steward and share, not community property to be claimed by whoever was bold enough to grab it. Some people complained about his boundaries. They said he was less generous than the first farmer, less trusting, less willing to help. But the results told a different story. The second farmer was able to help far more people over a much longer period of time. His harvests remained abundant because they were protected from exploitation. The people who received help from him were truly those who needed it rather than those who were simply opportunistic. The first farmer's unlimited kindness ultimately helped fewer people because it was unsustainable. The second farmer's bounded kindness helped more people because it was wise. The first farmer's generosity was consumed by the greedy. The second farmer's generosity was received by the needy. This is the lesson your life has been trying to teach you. Kindness without boundaries is not more virtuous than kindness with boundaries. It is less effective, less sustainable, and often less kind to the people who truly deserve kindness. When you allow your goodness to be exploited, you reduce the amount of goodness available to those who would honor it and use it well. The transformation begins when you realize that protecting your ability to be good is not selfish but necessary. Setting boundaries around your kindness is not cruel but wise. Requiring people to respect your generosity is not demanding but appropriate. You can remain good-hearted while becoming strong-minded. You can maintain your desire to help while developing the wisdom to help effectively. This means learning to distinguish between people who are grateful for your kindness and people who feel entitled to it. It means understanding the difference between someone who needs your help and someone who wants your help. It means recognizing that some people will test your boundaries, not because they are evil, but because they have learned that testing boundaries is often profitable. Your kindness becomes more powerful when it is intentional rather than automatic, selective rather than universal, protected rather than exposed to anyone who wants to take advantage of it. This doesn't make you less loving. It makes your love more valuable, more meaningful, and more available to those who will use it to grow rather than those who will use it to take. The person who can protect their own goodness is able to share that goodness for a lifetime. The person who cannot protect their goodness often discovers that their goodness gets consumed by those who have no goodness to offer in return, leaving them empty, bitter, and unable to help anyone at all. Kindness backed by wisdom is a gift to the world. Kindness without wisdom is often a gift to those who least deserve it at the expense of those who most need it. Your heart can remain soft while your boundaries remain firm. Your love can remain pure while your discernment remains sharp. Protection and kindness are not opposites. They are partners in creating a life that can sustain goodness over the long term rather than burning it out in the short term. You stand now at the threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. The man who entered this conversation carried the weight of every compromise, every swallowed insult, every boundary that dissolved under pressure. But something has shifted in the listening. Something has awakened in the understanding. The ancient kings knew that transformation happens not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet moments when a man decides that his dignity is not negotiable. It happens when you realize that respect is not something you earn once, but something you protect every single day through 1,000 small choices that either build your honor or erode it. Think of yourself now as a castle being rebuilt, not the crumbling fortress you inherited, with walls worn thin by years of allowing others to take what they pleased, but a new stronghold where every stone is placed with intention, every gate has a guardian, and every entrance requires permission rather than assumption. The person who respects you sees the walls and appreciates the architecture. The person who would exploit you sees the same walls and seeks another target, one without such clear boundaries. This is not about becoming harsh or unyielding. This is about becoming unmistakable in your worth. Your presence will begin to carry a different energy now. People will sense something has changed before they understand what has changed. The way you hold silence, the weight of your words, the steadiness of your gaze when someone tests the boundaries you have built. These are not performances. These are the natural expressions of someone who has remembered their value. If you are ready to continue this journey of reclaiming what was always rightfully yours, subscribe now. Not because this conversation is ending, but because it is deepening. The wisdom of Solomon flows through many channels, and each one reveals another layer of the strength you are building within yourself. You are not the same person who began watching this video. The question that remains is not whether you will change, but whether you will honor the change that has already begun.